Welcome back. We're going to be looking at planar tracking now, and this is exercise 6. So let's come in and we're going to bring in our media, and we're going to use the New York exterior media here. And I want to point out a little something here first before we go too far. Our media is 1440 by 1080. This was, I think the original was HDV acquired. So I'm going to show you what happens when we start up a new session. We've got our size is set to 1440 by 1080. The pixel aspect ratio is set to 1. Hang on, let's go New York, the exterior one. And you can see that the material here looks a bit squished. And that's because the pixel aspect ratio for this isn't actually 1 at all. Let's go back to our session again. The pixel aspect ratio for both HDV and some DVC Pro HD footage is actually 1.33. So if you're working with non-square pixels, what you want to hope to do is be able to use this aspect ratio correction button up here to help you out, sort of like squish to stretch the footage out so you can see it as it would normally look. Now we could of course come into our session settings and adjust the pixel aspect ratio here to 1.33, hit OK, and now it looks absolutely fine. But the this is a sort of a band-aid solution, because if you're working with quite a bit of footage that is non-square pixels, you don't really want to be playing around with this all the time. So here's a little way of fixing it. Now I'm working on a Mac here, but the same basic principles apply if you're working on Mac or Windows. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find the resources folder. On Mac, actually, it's a bit more tricky than it is on Windows. Because on the Mac, we don't have a specific resources folder quite yet. We have to right click on our Silhouette package here and show package content. And this opens up a whole new little thing which lets us delve a little bit deeper inside the app. And that's where we can find our resources folder right here. And in there we've got two XML files, which are the ones we can quite easily adjust. The first one is formats and the second one is masks. So let's come and have a look at the formats here. I'm just going to open this with a standard text editor, but you can open this with specific XML files, but you don't get any other benefits of that. The basic XML format is showing us all of the little presets that we have that we're working with at the moment. And it starts off with triangle brackets with format and ends with triangle brackets / format at the end. And in the middle, we have things that control for the name, the width, the height, the aspect ratio, and the frame rate. So we're going to create a custom version here, which does HDV and DVC Pro. I'm going to just copy this here. So with Apple C, Control C, and paste it in Apple V or Control V. And I'm going to call this one HDV 1080i. And as we've seen, our pixel aspect, our width is 1440, and our pixel aspect ratio is 133. Now in Europe, we're working with 25 frames a second. HDV is also interlaced here, so we're going to keep the interlace set to true. I'm going to make one more as well while I'm here, and that's going to replace the HD TV 24p one that we have here. I'm actually just going to adjust this and write 25p and set my frame rate to 25, because that's generally what I'm working with. Cool. So if I try to save this straight away here, it's not going to let me, because I haven't. It says I haven't got permissions to do it. So we're going to have to give ourselves permission to change this file. So I come over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my resources folder, go to get info, and I'm going to change the permissions here. So unlock this, type in my password, and set admin to read and write, and then apply all these to the enclosed items, hit OK. I can happily close this down. Now I want to make sure that I don't overwrite the original, so I'm going to rename this to old, and then I can just save this as .xml file, turn off my text here, save that out, and let's restart Silhouette. And once I've restarted Silhouette, let's open up the last one that I was working with, get rid of that session there and create a new session, and we'll see it's now automatically picked up my session here. Obviously I didn't change the title properly, but the rest of the details are all the same. So it's now 1440 by 1080, pixel aspect ratio of 133. New York 001. Cool. And it's come in with the correct aspect ratio, so that's kind of works out quite nicely. So that was just a little aside to what the main topic of this tutorial is going to be, which is going to be focusing on the planar tracker. So we had a look at the point tracker before in earlier exercises, and I want to have a quick look at the planar tracker now. So let's create a new layer. We will call this building 1. Let's play back our footage just so you know what we're looking at. So it's just a very quick shot across some buildings. Let's get this swinging back again. There we go. Cool. I'm going to pop us into the trackers here just for a second and come over to the planar tracker. And at the moment, I've got nothing that I could possibly track. So it's not giving me any other options. Everything looks a bit sort of weird. So the planar tracker needs both the a layer and a shape to work with. So let's just give it a shape. And then I'll talk about what a plane actually is, a little bit more detail. Cool, so now when I go back to the planar tracker, you can see if I just zoom in a little bit here, we've got loads of little different points coming in automatically inside our shape. So what it's doing is it's looking at our shape here and trying to find any good sort of tracking points that it can to perform a track. And it's automatically going to track all of these different points and discard them and add new ones as it needs to. But I think before we get too deep into the planar tracker, it's probably best to start to think about what a plane actually is first. Simply put, in geometric terms, a plane is a totally flat 2D object. So for example, the side of this building is a perfect plane. It can move in a variety of different ways. You can let's have a look. We can scale it, rotate it, translate it, and distort it. But at the end of the day, it's still a 2D object here. And it describes a particular plane of movement. So what the planar tracker is actually doing is, instead of you going in and manually picking out a few points and then tracking those and averaging those together, what the planar tracker is going to do is track a whole series of points and then try to follow where those are going, and then make an average movement out of that. And just with this sort of almost randomly placed object, let's see how that does. I'm not going to touch any of the other things here. And we can see actually at this moment it's going and performing quite well. You can see some of the tracking points that it picks up are way off, and that does throw, or that can throw the track out a little bit. But in this instance, it's actually not doing too bad a job, and until it gets a little bit confused right at the very end and goes completely mental. And that's one of the things with the planar tracker, is that Actually, you have to be fairly careful about where you place your specific object, because it can get a little bit confused. Let's lock that and turn that off, and try and look at a different building there. And let's just add another square. Actually, let's use the X-spline. Just to create our plane here. Let's set these to corners. Now, if you notice, what I'm doing is I am leaving out this bit here, this bit of the lamppost, because the lamppost is moving in a completely different way to the building. So it's working in a different plane to the building, so it's moving differently. Actually, because it's closer, it's actually moving faster, or it seems to be moving faster because of parallax. Cool, let's go back and take a quick look at our planar tracker again. Let's reset the tracker we had before, and that will come and find some new points for us to track in. Let's hit play, and you can see almost straight away it loses what it's trying to do. Let's reset that one more time. Let's just come to the timeline, just remove all of that because it's not quite fair. Come and just reset the matrix. And let's transform this spline back to where it was. So this is actually quite a tricky thing that it's trying to do here, because so much of this detail is similar to so much of the rest of the detail, so it could easily get confused. But in this case, we seem to be doing all right. Then it's holding its own again. And averaging out and discarding the trackers that it can't use. And even here it's getting a kind of okay sort of result. It is getting thrown off by the lights and things. So, this is probably one of those cases where you can see there's a lot of sunlight coming in, changing everything out quite bright, quite a lot. So if I was to change to one of the different colour channels, maybe the blue, for example, here, that might give us a better result. Or not, as the case may be. So it can be a little bit fragile. So if we get to a stage where things are messing up quite badly, remember, my golden rules. Golden rule number 5: it ain't working, trash it, start it again. In this case, we might have to just find another technique that we can use to get this working. Now, one of the things I want to show you, just again, I'm going to persevere just a tiny little bit. Let's unlock that. Let's go ahead and delete that. I just want to show you one little thing that we can do. Let's come in. I'm going to add a huge shape here, and we'll just select all of the points there and just sharpen those up a little bit. Cool. One of the things the Planar Tracker also does is it does respect the blend modes you've got set up here. So if I was to come in and also take this, for example, turn that off, and then do another one here. So I'll set that to subtract. Do another one set to that to subtract as well. I'll call this main. So if I come into my planar tracker now, hit reset on that, it's not going to add any trackers within this area here that I'm taking out. One way to speed these up as well is to take us to the foreground view, so it's not rendering out the little shapes there, and it could work, conceivably work a little bit faster. And we can do the same thing with pre-processing as we've done before. So come in, let's add a bit of contrast. Actually add a bit of sharpness maybe, denoise. So with my remove flicker turned on, it's actually not helping us in any way. It's not letting us track, so let's turn that off, see what happens. And it's doing a pretty good job. It's not perfect because I think I'm actually, the lamppost here, which is the lamppost, which is exactly what I'm after, was picking up some of the stuff. So I might just come in and change that up a little bit, keyframe that up. So basically doing a really rough garbage mat on it. And let's figure out the point where it was messing up. Round about there, starts jumping a little bit. It's coming down. It says it's found 1,000 valid tracks. That's pretty. Yeah, that's pretty high. Let's track that through a little bit more. Retrack that, and as it goes off screen just at the end, starts to mess up, but that's hardly there's a little bit of bump there as well. And as it goes off screen, it messes up there, but that's hardly surprising considering the complete lack of data there is left in there. So it's not doing a bad job. I mean, there's a bit of bounce here that we want to get rid of. So come in and just retrack those bad frames. Cool. Well, that's still a little bit too bouncy to use right at the moment. So what I'm going to do is actually try something different. Let's come over, just lock that and turn that off. I'm going to come over. We're going to look at this one here instead. We're going to look at this one instead. So let's create a new layer. We'll call this building 2. And let's use our X-spline just to get something a bit interesting there. Just move those up a little bit here. Cool. And let's go to track again. Again, it's picked up tons and tons of good tracking markers for us. Let's check to make sure that's looking all right. It's maybe a bit contrasty. Cool. And let's start by tracking that forwards just a couple of frames to see what happens. Seems to be holding pretty nicely. And we'll do the same back here. So it gets closer towards the edge. Just going to track that one frame at a time. That seems to be holding really well. Except about there where it's starting to go too far out of screen and we can't really do anything about that. So what I'm going to do on this one, you can see that the jump, this one's looking all pretty good. It jumps down and then jumps back up again. So where we've got something that's that unstable, better just to ditch those keyframes. So let's come to our timeline here. Remember, all of the tracker markers or the tracker information is stored within the matrix here. So we can just get rid of those. And that should be fine and dandy. So how do we use that? Well, let's come in and we'll call this the planar track shape. And I can lock this and hide it. I can even delete it actually at this point because we're not going to be using it anymore. But I'm going to keep it just for now. So once we've got that, let's come in and use a Bezier spline and just draw around this building really quickly. There we go, you get the point. And we're still on foreground, so that's not going to show us our alpha. There we go, that's nice. And let's just check out what that's doing. And that's matching really quite nicely without us having to do any other stuff. So this is actually quite a, I'm not going to say it's a complex move, because it's a fairly sort of standard move, but it has saved us quite a lot of time of coming in and manually trying to shape and distort the various shapes that we have here, because we wouldn't be able to do it just with the single building shape here, because we can't come in and we can't use the let's turn our overlays back on. We can't use the distort tool on objects. We can only do the transform of the scale, position and rotation. It's only in the matrix here, using the planar tracker, that we can come in and we can get that same feeling of distortion that we could do on the buildings, or sorry, on the shapes themselves. And you know, that's fitting really quite nicely. So when the planar tracker works, it works great. You just have to be aware of its limitations, and sometimes it can be a little bit prickly depending on what footage you are trying to track. So if we do have something where, you know, there isn't a great amount of change in detail, you know, a point tracker could easily get confused with that. And the planar tracker here is built up of multiple point trackers, all averaged out with some very clever maths, of course, that gives us our final result. Now, if these point trackers are getting all sort of weird and wacky, then obviously the result that we're going to get is going to be a little bit weird and wacky as well. So just be aware of it. And as we can see, it's far easier to come in and get us 90% of the way there, which is what we've got here with our matrix, and then just come in with the position, maybe a bit of rotation at the very end, and just move that out of the way. So let's come in and transform this. So it's far easier to just add a couple of keyframes at the very end than it is to fight with the planar tracker if it's not deciding to play ball at that particular moment in time. Cool. I think that's all I've really got to say about the planar tracker for the moment anyway. If you have the right source material, the planar tracker can be very useful. So really the only thing that's important to remember with the planar tracker, if you do have the right footage, is what order to do things in, you know, and that is to create your shape that you're going to be tracking, and track that, and then do the main shape afterwards. Theoretically, you could also do your main shape straight away, but actually I find that if you just create a rough shape that describes the plane, and you do that quickly, that will actually save you time in the long run, just to see whether the planar tracker is going to be the right tool for you to use before you create your beautiful full shape, and then discover that actually you're going to have to use another tool to get the job done. Cool. Well, in exercise 7, we've actually got a bit of a tricky one to go with. We've got another human body that we're going to be rotating, and this time we have to deal with spinning and occlusion. We might also take a quick look at the Kia as well. But that's all coming up in exercise 7. So I'll see you on the other side.